Hey guys, this is going to be a long, in-depth video on the teardown of a brand new Axial Yeti. I'm going to try and go through and show you all the different components and details of the entire truck to show you what this truck is really about. And it's not just an independent front suspension Wraith. This truck is a lot more than that, and I want to show you some of those details that make this truck unique. So we're going to get right into it. This is going to be a fairly long video and I don't want to waste too much time. So the first thing is we'll just kind of go over the general outline and purpose of the truck. Now, as you may have seen before, this is the brand new truck from Axial. It's an independent suspension in the front with the solid axle in the rear. Now, this is similar to a lot of the full-size King of the Hammers or Ultra 4 type rigs that you'll see right now. But this truck is kind of made to be a hybrid of speed and performance on off-road situations such as rocks and things like that. It's not going to be a hardcore crawler, especially right out of the box. There's going to be tons of modifications that we could do to make this thing perform much better in the rocks, and I'll get into those later in further videos, as that'll be kind of my general direction with this particular truck. But right out of the box, you've got the independent suspension up front with an open front diff, meaning that it's got the differential set inside rather than the typical locked axle set that you may find in like the Wraith or SCX-10 if you're more familiar with Axial solid axle trucks. But the open front end in this car will allow for some better turning and handling at speed. For rock crawling performance, there's some methods you could take to lock that front end solid. Now, another big difference between this truck and a Wraith is the body. Now, the body on a Wraith is actually the cage with the full body panels, and this may look fairly similar, but it's not. This cage is actually really just a body. It's not a structural member of this chassis, and it's actually got some pretty cool features. You can remove two body pins in the very front of the chassis, and then the whole body is allowed to lift straight up, allowing you easy access to this battery box that's here on the side. Now, that battery box is a fairly large box, allowing for multiple sizes of batteries, and also is adjustable to make sure that no matter what size battery you're using, it's easy to get it held tight. With this hinged body system, two more body clips removed in the rear, and the whole body is allowed to lift right off, and it's as simple as that. So here we have the full view of the chassis that lays underneath. You can see a brand new transmission that sits here in the center, powered by a new 4-pole brushless waterproof motor. This is a 3150 kV, branded as an Axial Vanguard, but produced by Castle Creations. Paired with it is an Axial branded ESC, also again made by Castle Creations. Also waterproof. You can get in close on top of the ESC and you can actually see some of the potting epoxy they used to make sure that thing was waterproof. So we're going to continue to strip this car down. I'm going to start by removing the rolling stock and touching on the details of it. So the rolling stock on this truck is very similar to the Poison Spider Wraith. It comes with a true 3-piece beadlock and the BFG crawler tires in the harder ready to run compound. Axial also makes these in a stickier R35 compound. Now, the main difference is that these wheels have a Walker Evans pattern on the face rather than the Trail Ready pattern that came on the Poison Spider Wraith. So just a little bit different style there. Again, they come with the 6-bolt hub that bolts onto the face of the wheel, allowing you to later on change the offset of the wheel if you would like. But for now, what it does is it eliminates the use of a 12mm hex and uses a straight pin drive. So rather than having that hex piece there, you just use a pin right in the back of this wheel. So now that we have the wheels and tires out of the way, we can get a better look at the suspension. Again, this truck has an independent front suspension, or IFS. Now, this independent suspension was basically borrowed from the Axial EXO with a couple of different changes is all. It uses the exact same arms, hub carriers, and the ready-to-run suspension links that were in the Axial EXO kit. However, it has a brand new set of steering knuckles that improve the clearance drastically from the wheels to allow the use of a 2.2 inner bead rather than a 3.0 inner bead like the short course wheels on the Axial EXO used. This allows you to get a 2.2 tucked much closer in to the center of the vehicle by adding that clearance at the knuckles. Also new for this truck is the new steering rack. It's a little bit different and a little bit redesigned from what we saw in the Axial EXO. So that was one improvement that Axial saw fit to make. The center of the suspension, also the same as the Axial EXO. It borrows the same front bulkhead that the Axial EXO used. However, it does have a brand new front shock tower. Moving right along to the rear of this truck, you'll see an Axial Wraith rear axle pretty much unchanged. What you will see a little bit different is that this is running a trailing arm rear suspension, meaning that the shock mounts on the actual lower link and further up away from the axle. This allows you to get a lot more suspension travel with the same length shock. One other thing to note is that on this truck, you can actually mount dual shocks. You can mount one shock from the first hole here to the first hole on the trailing arm, or you can mount one from the second hole down to the second. Now, I've moved my shock back from the first hole to the second up top just to stiffen the suspension up a little bit. After my very first run, the rear was a little too squatty for what I was wanting to do, so I moved that back and it just stiffened it up just a little bit, but still gave me quite a bit of travel. So that was just a simple addition that I did to kind of tweak how I wanted to drive this car. So as you can see, this truck has a ton of travel in the rear. Now, something you also may notice is the addition of these bars up here on the top. And what those are is a long travel sway bar set. So this sway bar is very similar to setups you may have seen before, being a bent wire in a U. Now, something new Axial has done is they've come up with these plastic arms that slide over top of them, as well as a threaded on rod end section for the end. The upper section is mostly cosmetic, but also adds a stabilizer to keep it centered. However, the end serves a couple of functions. It allows you to attach the tie link, as we see here, going down to the axle, but it also has integrated stops in it to allow the truck to droop out at a certain point. Now, while we're looking at the rear end, we can see this brand new fuel cell that Axial's put in the back there. Now, Axial has been kind of toting this as an adjustable weight box location as well. Now, when we open this up, we'll see a nice large cavity that could be used for a variety of different uses, including that adjustable weight box area that Axial's been talking about. So now that we've got that box open, we can see back there just a nice large open space to use for whatever you would like. It would probably be fairly easy to make this box watertight, and at that same time, there is some ribs molded into this box for future use of who knows what. Jumping back to the front of the car, we've got something new from Axial in the front bumper area, which is this new shock cushioning front bumper system. On a front impact, you'll actually see that bumper be able to smash back a little bit rather than having to take all that force into rigid points. Now we're at the point where we're ready to start tearing into this truck. I'm going to start by removing this front plate up here, give you a good look at that new Axial steering system that they designed. So now with this front batwing piece being removed, we can get a good look at the steering system underneath. This system looks fairly familiar to a lot of the other steering systems that you may have seen in RC cars with this style suspension before. Now, with that top plate removed, we can also spot another change between this car and the Axial EXO, which is it uses a fixed front joint on the input shaft of that front differential. This connection looks like it's using a very similar style to the other WB8 HD drive shafts that Axial recently came out with, that are an upgraded version of the original wild bore drive shafts. Another huge upgrade on those wild bore drive shafts was the move to a larger pin on the actual shaft, allowing you to use a 2mm wrench to remove that. By going to 4mm threads, allowing you to use that 2mm wrench, it just helps you reduce that possibility of stripping out or breaking those 1.5mm drivers. If I could eliminate any size driver I had, it'd be that 1.5. It seems like it's the size that I'm most commonly breaking or wearing out. So that is just one of the simple changes that Axial's done that is a really nice little upgrade. Moving back just a couple of inches, we'll see that brand new transmission from Axial. This thing is much more complex than the standard Wraith or SCX-10 transmission that we've seen in the past. We're going to start right off by checking how the serviceability of it is with it still installed in the car. With the removal of 2 screws, I was able to remove the spur gear cover. Underneath that spur gear cover, we'll see the brand new dual slipper spur gear, as well as 32 pitch on both of them. Now, the input shaft on this pinion gear for this 4-pole motor is a 5mm bore. So you'll need to pay close attention to that if you're going to order pinion gears to change your gearing. Make sure you get a 5mm input. Very important. Now, to remove the motor, it's also very simple. The removal of these 2 4mm screws on the top of the transmission allows you to remove this top clamping piece And after that piece is removed, this whole motor just pulls right out. Now, super simple. And then from there, you remove 2 more screws on the face of the motor, and you can separate the motor from this new circular shape motor plate. Now, that circular shape motor plate is another new feature that's very handy. If I install this back in the car, to adjust the gear mesh on this car, you simply turn the motor or that motor plate. And what that does is that moves the position of that motor. Since it's slightly offset in that motor plate, it moves it further or closer to the spur gear. It's actually very easy to adjust your gear mesh right with that motor and transmission in the car. Another little feature you may miss is in this motor plate is this little carved out section on that plate there. And what that is for is that's to be able to get to the set screw on your pinion if it's set a little bit too far into there when it would interfere with that motor plate. Now we're going to take a look at the ESC and mounting system. Axial again ships this car with a Castle produced ESC. Another plus is that it actually comes right out of the box with Dean's plugs. This is using a similar plate to what came with the Axial Wraith with a clamping feature to actually hold this ESC right into place. So nice, secure, but also super easy to just pop right out if you wanted to. Now to remove this ESC, you can remove 3 simple screws and the tray will pop right out. However, you will need to remove the plug from the receiver, which you actually access from underneath of the car. To access the receiver, you remove these 4 screws from the bottom side of the car. Now, that receiver box is held watertight by this door that has a silicone gasket all the way around the outside. So when you screw that down, it creates a nice, tight, watertight seal. Now, after removing the door of the electronics box, you can get a look at the tiny little axial receiver that is inside. This is a pretty standard receiver from Axial. We've seen this in most of their ready to runs for quite a while now. Now, controlling that receiver is the standard Axial 2-channel radio that we've seen come with all their ready to runs for quite a while now. Standard 2.4 gigahertz radio with basic trims and dual rates. Now, this receiver box is held watertight by a couple of different seals. First of all, there's a little silicone seal where all of the wires go through. You put your individual wires through this, and that will actually keep a nice watertight seal once you get everything closed up. In the empty slot, Axial ships this with a small black plastic piece in there that fills that empty void for if you decide to go to a 3-channel type setup, as if you're going to use the 2-speed upgrade set that is planned for this transmission. So if you open that and you see a little black piece in there, be careful because that's supposed to be there, and if you want this watertight, you're going to need that little plug in there. After removing that ESC, pay attention not to lose this long post that sits along the far passenger side of the chassis. If you lose that, you're going to have a hard time getting that ESC mounted as stable as it was out of the box. Now, by removing 2 screws that hold the servo down to the chassis and then 1 that holds the linkage to the servo horn, we're allowed to remove this new Tactic TSX45 servo. Now, this servo shows some Hobbyco influence to the Axial Ready to Run products. You've seen these Tactic servos show up in some of the more recent releases from Axial. This servo is supposed to be a little bit beefier, a little bit stronger than the old AE line of servos that we've seen come in the Axial Ready to Runs before. At this point, you can start to see the layout of the chassis and that transmission sitting there in the middle. So next, let's remove that transmission and get a look inside of it. As I remove the 6 screws from the bottom of this chassis to remove the transmission, one thing that's nice to note is that Axial is using machine thread hardware on most of the parts in this truck, even the ones that are threading directly into plastic. So machine thread screws have always been pretty nice as far as their holding ability into other plastic. It's just that they're not as easy to remove as the coarser thread screws that they've used on some things in the past. So the nice move to machine thread for durability is nice to see. So after removing the 6 screws from the bottom, the transmission literally fell right out. So here on the rear of this brand new transmission, you can see this scale appearing transfer case. Now, this thing looks very similar to some of the transfer cases you would see in a full-size vehicle, and hopefully this is something that maybe we'll see in a future Axial product, maybe an updated SCX-10 or something like that. It would just be cool to see something like this worked into other parts and pieces down the line, or possibly this whole transmission, specifically with its ability to be upgraded with a 2-speed option. So with the removal of the 3 screws from the back side of this transfer case, we can open it up and reveal the 3-gear setup that we see here. Now this uses two 15-tooth gears as well as a 27-tooth gear. That comes out to a 1.8 to 1 gear ratio out of this transfer case. Now after removing one of these gears, we can see the nice wide contact path of those 32 pitch gears. That looks like a fairly stout setup, and hopefully that results to a very beefy drivetrain. Now to remove this transfer case from the rest of the transmission, you just have to pull. Now that transfer case is aligned to the back side of that transmission with this splined section. That's very similar to like a scaled down version of the Axial Wraith axle ends, which are on the back side of this truck as well. Removing 4 more screws allows me to split the transmission cases on the main body of this transmission. Inside of this fairly large transmission, you'll find only 2 small gears. This is a 26-tooth top gear and a 28-tooth bottom gear. That gives us just barely a small amount over 1-to-1 from the inside of this transmission. Now these gears are also very wide, giving us a nice large contact patch. Now these, however, are a 48 pitch rather than the 32 pitch that we saw in the transmission transfer case. One nice thing to note about this transmission is that the entire thing uses 5x11x4 standard size bearings. No more large bearings here or there that are more difficult to find at any hobby shop you walk in. Any hobby shop you go to will have a 5x11x4. All this leaves for this transmission is the spur gear and the slipper. Now, this is the brand new dual slipper that we've seen introduced in the new Axial Deadbolt ready to run. So that is no surprise to see that beefy setup introduced into this truck as well. At this time, I'm also going to take the opportunity to really crank down on this slipper. As for the duties that I'm going to ask from this thing, I don't want this transmission to slip very often. So that doesn't leave me with much of a truck left to show. However, there are still some details in this thing that I'd really like to point out to you guys just to show the level of detail that Axial went into. Now in the chassis here, you'll see all this honeycombing and webbing. Now that's to add stiffness to this plastic chassis tub. However, integrated into that system is this little odd looking part here. And if you pay attention, what that actually is it's a molded in wire chase. By the removal of one screw, you're able to pop that cap off, and what that does is it allows you a nice route from the receiver box all the way over to the other side of that chassis, which leads into this little compartment underneath this plate on the side here. With the chassis torn down as far as we are, we only have to remove one screw, and we can remove the cap to that small little compartment here on the side. Now, that's just an empty compartment right now. However, what that compartment is for is it's going to be to hold the servo for the 2-speed upgrade option whenever that becomes available from Axial. Now, when that kit's released, there's most definitely going to have to be some sort of servo mount that comes with it. But for now, we can get some sort of idea just by taking a standard servo and putting it straight down into that cavity. So we know that a servo is going to go in there somehow. Lastly, but by far not the least important, the battery box setup on this car. Now, I showed you that hinged body mechanism. 2 body clips in the front, and you can hinge up that entire body. Once you get under there, 1 body clip here on the side, and it allows you access to an easy hinged battery door. Now, at that time, as soon as you open the battery door, you can simply take and slide your LiPo in. Very simple. However, you may notice that there's a little bit too much room for this battery to slide around in there. Axial's accommodated this with the addition of this plate that goes on the top here that's adjustable for height. By completely removing these screws on this tray, it allows you to set it exactly at the height you want, and then you simply reinstall the screws. Now, if you're using multiple size batteries, you're going to have to make some concessions for that. However, if you're using standard batteries like these hard case LiPos that I have here, you're not going to have any issues, and each time you're going to be able to slide it right in without any further work. That's it for the teardown of this brand new Axial Yeti. I know it was long, but thanks for those of you guys that stuck around for the whole thing. I'm going to take this opportunity to clean this truck back up before I get it all back together and start doing the things to it that I want to make it suitable for the exact terrain that I'm going to use. This car is going to be extremely at home going at speed. I want to use it for a little bit of mixed. I want to probably push it a little bit more towards the rock and crawling aspect than a lot of people will. But there's going to be so much diversity with these new cars. So watch out for all the different directions that you can take these things. And hopefully my direction is going to be some of the ways that some of you guys would like to see. So stick around for following videos. And hopefully I can get some information up there that'll help you guys build your guys' Yeti exactly how you're looking to do that. But for now, that's it, and we'll see you guys on the next one.